Law Media on YouTube. It is your guy, Sports Law, broadcasting live from my studio at my house. Today, we will be doing Major League Baseball games, my perspective. In this live stream today, we will go over who is playing for the games for May 16th, 17th, and 18th. We will go over not only who's playing each day, but the starting pitcher. And then we'll go over my picks for who I think will win the game that day. So this hopefully will be a fun thing to do, but it's a little bit different aspect of things because of certain things. So let's get into this. According to what I'm seeing here, we have Chicago White Sox versus the Chicago Cubs, which will have Shane Smith versus Cade Horton. You'll have Cleveland versus Cincinnati, which will be Tanner Bilby versus Brady Singer. You'll have Pittsburgh versus Philadelphia, which is Andrew Haney versus Ranger Suarez. You'll have the New York Mets versus the New York Yankees, which is Tyler McGill versus Carlos Rodon. You'll have Washington versus Baltimore, which is Mackenzie Gore versus Kyle Gibson. You'll have Detroit versus Toronto, which will be Jack Flattery versus Bowden Francis. You have Atlanta versus Boston, and that will be Chris Sale versus Garrett Crochet or Crotchet. You'll have Tampa Bay versus Miami. That'll be Taj Bradley versus Max Meyer. You'll have St. Louis versus Kansas City, which will be Andre Paliante versus Cole Reagans. You'll have Houston, Texas. You'll have Houston versus Texas, and that'll be Lance McCullers Jr. versus Nathan Eovaldi. You'll have Minnesota playing Milwaukee, which will be Joe Ryan versus Chad Patrick. You'll have Colorado versus Arizona, which will be undecided versus Corbin Burns. And you'll have Logan Evans versus Stephen Kolek in Seattle versus San Diego. Los Angeles Angels versus Los Angeles Dodgers will be Jack Koshanowicz, versus Tony Gonsolin. And then you'll have the Athletics versus San Francisco, which will be J.P. Sears versus Logan Webb. Those games are taking place today, May 15th, that will be taking place tomorrow, May 16th. And this information is also provided on the ESPN website, so that you'll see ESPN when I'm showing it on my screen. So now I'm going to go through and make picks on this game. Can y'all hear me out there in YouTube land? Anyway, my picks for the games on Friday, May 16th will be the Chicago Cubs will defeat the Chicago White Sox. Cincinnati will beat Cleveland. Philadelphia will beat Pittsburgh. The New York Yankees will beat the New York Mets. I'll have Baltimore beating Washington. Toronto beating Detroit. Boston beating Atlanta. Miami defeating Tampa Bay. Kansas City defeating St. Louis. Texas will defeat Houston. Milwaukee defeats Minnesota. Arizona will beat Colorado. San Diego will defeat Seattle. Los Angeles Dodgers will beat Los Angeles Angels. San Francisco will beat the Athletics. Now, moving on to May 17th, which is Saturday. Again, it'll be a lot of the same matchups, but different pitchers. So, you have the New York Mets versus the New York Yankees, which will be Griffin Canning versus undecided. The Chicago White Sox versus the Chicago Cubs, Sean Burke versus Matthew Boyd. Detroit versus Toronto, which will be Reese Olson versus Jose Urena. Washington versus Baltimore, which will be Jake Irvin versus Zach Elfin. Tampa Bay versus Miami, which will be Drew Rasmussen versus Edward Cabrera. Pittsburgh versus Philadelphia, which will be Carmen Miodozinski versus Zach Wheeler. Cleveland versus Cincinnati, which will be Luis Ortiz versus Chase Petty. Houston versus Texas, Ronel Blanco versus Tyler Mahle. You have St. Louis versus Kansas City, which will be Miles McCollus versus Seth Lugo. You have Atlanta versus Boston, which will be Grant Holmes versus Lucas Giolito. Minnesota versus Milwaukee, which will be Pablo Lopez versus undecided. You have Colorado versus Arizona, which will be German Marquez versus Zach Gallen. You'll have Seattle versus San Diego, which will be undecided versus Nick Pivetta. The Athletics versus San Francisco, which will be Luis Severino versus Landon Roop. Then you have the Los Angeles Angels versus the Los Angeles Dodgers, which will be Tyler Anderson versus Clayton Kershaw. In those games, here are my picks for Saturday's games. It will be the New York Mets defeats the New York Yankees. Chicago White Sox might actually get a win and defeat the Chicago Cubs. Detroit will defeat Toronto. Washington will defeat Baltimore. Tampa Bay versus Miami. Tampa Bay will win that. Pittsburgh will defeat Philadelphia. Cleveland will beat Cincinnati. Houston will defeat Texas. St. Louis versus Kansas City. St. Louis will beat Kansas City. Atlanta will beat Boston. Minnesota will beat Milwaukee. Colorado will defeat Arizona. Seattle will defeat San Diego. The Athletics will defeat San Francisco. And Los Angeles Angels will defeat the Los Angeles Dodgers. Now, given these are my picks and these are my thoughts, I could be totally wrong on these picks, and that's okay. But we're going to just go with that. So, next on May 18th, which is Sunday, you have Houston versus Texas. You have Atlanta versus Boston. You have Pittsburgh versus Philadelphia. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me start back over on that. Houston versus Texas, which will be Ryan Gusto versus Jack Leiter. You have Atlanta versus Boston, which will be Spencer Schwellenbach versus Brayan Bello. You have Pittsburgh versus Philadelphia, which will be Paul Skinnis versus Christopher Sanchez. You have Washington versus Baltimore, which will be Michael Soroka versus undecided. You have Detroit versus Toronto, which will be Jackson Jobe versus Jose Barrios. You have Cleveland versus Cincinnati, which will be undecided versus Andrew Abbott. Let's see. You'll have Tampa Bay versus Miami, which will be Shane Baz versus Sandy Alcantara. Minnesota versus Milwaukee, undecided versus Freddie Peralta. Then you have St. Louis versus Kansas City, which will be Matthew Liberatore versus Michael Wacha. You have Chicago White Sox versus the Chicago Cubs, which will be Jonathan Cannon versus Colin Ray. The Athletics versus San Francisco, which will be Jeffrey Springs versus Justin Verlander. The Los Angeles Angels versus the Los Angeles Dodgers. Yusei Kikuchi versus Landon Knack. You have Colorado versus Arizona, which will be Chase Dollander versus Merrill Kelly. You have Seattle versus San Diego, which will be Emerson Hancock versus Michael King. The New York Mets versus the New York Yankees. David Peterson versus Clark Schmidt. And right now, it seems like they are the best team in the league. I don't know if they'll win the World Series this year. It's still a little too early for that. I can start getting an idea of where teams are about the middle part of the season or somewhere near the 4th of July. And nothing against making a pick like that, but I don't know if they're going to win the World Series yet. It's too early for me to make a call on that. However, I do appreciate your input and insight, and we shall see on that. When it gets about that part of the season, I can look and see where they're at that point, and then maybe I can tell you at that time whether or not I agree with you or not. I mean, the Cardinals are a good team, yes, but you could be good now in the first half of the season and totally suck the second half of the season, or you could suck the first half of the season and win out the second half of the season. I mean, look at what happened with the Braves a few years ago. They royally sucked the first half of the season, and then during the second half of the season, they turned it around, came back and won the World Series. And even before they were sucking, they were not even over 500 or, on the wins column, and they just somehow managed to do that. So, we shall see and everything. I mean, right now they're looking great, but, it is the first half of the season, and again, just like I said, You could do really well the first half and royally suck the second half, or you royally suck the first half and come back and somehow manage to make it to the World Series in the second half. So, like I said, I do like your insight, and I'll pay attention to that team. But I'm not going to make a prediction right now on who I think is going to be World Series until I've seen the first half of the season or until the middle of July. So, thank you for that. I do appreciate that. So now, I'm going to make my picks for the Sunday games. I'm going to have Houston defeat Texas. I'm going to have Boston beat Atlanta. I'm going to have Pittsburgh defeat Philadelphia. I'm going to have Washington defeat Baltimore. I'm going to have Toronto beat Detroit. I'm going to have Cleveland beat Cincinnati. I'm going to have Miami beating Tampa Bay. I'm going to have Minnesota beating Milwaukee. I'm going to have St. Louis winning the game over Kansas City for Sunday. I'm going to have the Chicago Cubs defeat the Chicago White Sox. I'm going to have the Athletics defeat San Francisco. I'm going to have the Los Angeles Dodgers defeat the Los Angeles Angels. I'm going to have Colorado defeat Arizona. I'm going to have San Diego defeat Seattle, and I'm going to have the New York Mets defeating the New York Yankees. So, just a quick summary of that. Basically, for the games on Friday, May 16th, I have the Chicago White Sox winning I have the Chicago Cubs winning their game over the Chicago White Sox. I have Cincinnati defeating Cleveland, Philadelphia defeating Pittsburgh, the New York Yankees defeating the New York Mets, Baltimore defeating Washington, Toronto defeating Detroit, Boston defeating Atlanta, Miami will defeat Tampa Bay, Kansas City will defeat St. Louis that one day, Texas will defeat Houston, Milwaukee will defeat Minnesota, Arizona will defeat Colorado, San Diego will defeat Seattle, the Los Angeles Dodgers will defeat the Los Angeles Angels, San Francisco will defeat the Athletics. For Saturday, May 17th games, I have the New York Mets defeating the New York Yankees. I have the Chicago White Sox managing to eke out one win for the Chicago Cubs. I have Detroit defeating Toronto. I have Washington defeating Baltimore. I have Tampa Bay defeating Miami. I have Pittsburgh defeating Philadelphia. I have Cleveland defeating Cincinnati. I have Houston defeating Texas. I have St. Louis defeating Kansas City. I have Atlanta defeating Boston. Minnesota defeating Milwaukee, Colorado defeating Arizona, Seattle defeating San Diego, the Athletics defeating San Francisco, the Los Angeles Angels defeating the Los Angeles Dodgers. On Sunday, May 18th, I will have Houston defeating Texas, Boston defeat Atlanta, Pittsburgh defeating Philadelphia, Baltimore defeating Washington, Detroit defeating Toronto, Cincinnati defeating Cleveland, Tampa Bay defeating Miami, Milwaukee defeating Minnesota, St. Louis defeating Kansas City, Chicago Cubs defeating the Chicago White Sox, the Athletics defeating San Francisco, the Los Angeles Dodgers defeating the Los Angeles Angels, Colorado defeats Arizona, San Diego defeats Seattle, the New York Mets defeats the New York Yankees. So there you have it. Those are my picks, my predictions, my perspective for Major League Baseball games that will be taking place May 16th through 18th of 2025. If you will, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the notification bell so you can be made aware of when I'm doing these Major League Baseball predictions from my perspective, when I have sports action videos, when I have sports education videos, when I broadcast live, or when I have breaking news in the sports world. Again, I wish to thank each and every one of you for joining me for this broadcast today. If you wish to subscribe, it would be greatly helpful and appreciated. But there's several ways you can do so through YouTube. One is you go to www.youtube.com, the slash symbol, the at symbol, SPORTSLOV. Another way you can go about doing so is going on the YouTube search tab and type in Bob Amin. That is BOBAMIN. You'll know it's me because I have Sports Live Media burned into a basketball as my avatar. I'm also on the Twitter X area. And with that, you can find my handle at Bob Amin 16. That's the at symbol, BOBAMIN 16. That way you can find me and follow me on Twitter. Does anybody have any questions, comments regarding what I just talked about? I know this is a short live stream. We do these Major League Baseball live streams generally 1 to 3 days a week. Some weeks they'll be up to 3 days a week. Other days it might be just 1 day a week. But I'll try to do these regularly. And sometimes, depending on the day I do the live streams, I can provide more information. Not just who's playing, but I can do I can do the time when the games start. When it's appropriate, I can do the money line, and I can do the over under. But a lot of times I don't have that information available right at that time. I did get the information today from ESPN's website. So if you want more information about the games, including maybe who might get to pitch in the areas of the games I said that were undecided, you can always go there and find more information. Yes, we will have other specialty live streams, but those will be announced at the time when I know they're coming. There may be from what I'm looking at, there's a possibility of another live stream on Saturday, but that's going to be weather permitting, because if I do it, it will be an outdoor thing, and I don't know what it will be just yet. But if we do, it'll be an outdoor thing on Saturday, and I'll let you know more details about that when it comes available. Outside of that, we will continue to do these Major League Baseball live streams. Like I said, 1 to 3 times a week, and those will continue at least through early August. After early August, we'll have to see what's going on at that time. Anyway, thank you for joining me today on Sports Law Media. I do greatly appreciate it. I'm Bob Amin signing out. Thanks, and have a wonderful day.